Let's step into the life of one of the most versatile and intellectually daring poets of the 20th century, Wistan Hugh Auden. He was born in York, England on February 21st, 1907, and his early years were marked by both curiosity and restlessness. His family soon moved to Birmingham, where Auden grew up in an environment that valued both science and art. Auden went on to study at Oxford University, where his poetic talent quickly drew attention. It was during these university years that he formed lifelong friendships with fellow writers like Stephen Spender and Christopher Isherwood, and that association has been mentioned in exam. Together, they would go on to become the central figures of what we now call the Auden Group. From his earliest days, Auden was deeply influenced by poets such as Thomas Hardy, Robert Frost, Emily Dickinson, Gerard Manley Hopkins, and William Blake. Their rhythms, moral vision, and technical control helped him shape his own distinctive voice. The patterns of Old English verse, with its strong alliteration and musical structure, also left a lasting mark on his poetic style. In 1928, Auden privately printed a small collection titled simply Poems, a modest beginning for a poet who would soon dominate modern verse. But it was his 1930 volume, also called Poems, that truly established him as a major literary figure. This collection introduced the world to Auden's energetic voice, witty, intellectual, and socially engaged. Auden's poetry stood out for its technical mastery and its remarkable variety of forms. He could write with equal ease in ballads, sonnets, dramatic monologues, or political verse. What made him truly modern, though, was his ability to blend high culture with popular references. A newspaper headline might appear next to a biblical image, or a scientific idea might meet a mythological symbol. His intellectual reach extended far beyond poetry. Auden absorbed ideas from literature, art, music, psychology, and political theory. He even experimented with the styles of other poets, at times echoing Yeats or Dickinson, or even classical meters, creating an ever-changing poetic personality. Travel, both literal and symbolic, became a central theme in his writing. Auden journeyed through Germany, Iceland, and China, and each of these experiences found its way into his verse, giving it both global perspective and moral depth. During the Spanish Civil War, Auden briefly served as an ambulance driver, a moment that intensified his political awareness. Soon after, he moved to the United States, where he would spend much of his later life. It was there that he met Chester Coleman, who became his lifelong companion and collaborator. Eventually, Auden became an American citizen, solidifying his dual identity, English by origin, but transatlantic in influence. In his early years, Auden's work carried the passion of socialism and the insights of Freudian psychoanalysis, reflecting the anxieties and hopes of the interwar generation. But as he grew older, his poetry turned inward, exploring the spiritual dimensions of human experience. He embraced Christianity, particularly modern Protestant theology, and this transformation in his outlook has been noted in exam. Auden was not only a poet, he was also a playwright, librettist, and essayist, collaborating on operas and writing literary criticism that shaped how poetry was read in the modern age. His influence reached across both sides of the Atlantic, inspiring countless poets in Britain and America. He was later appointed as Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, and that recognition too has been mentioned in exam. Throughout his life, he divided his time between New York and Austria, seeking balance between the urban pulse of America and the quiet reflection of the Alps. Auden passed away in Vienna on September 29, 1973, leaving behind a body of work that spanned political, philosophical, and religious themes, all written with dazzling intelligence and wit. Critics have long debated his complex style. The renowned scholar F.R. Lewis once remarked that Auden's irony could sometimes feel self-defensive, self-indulgent, or merely irresponsible, and this very remark has been cited in exam. On the other hand, Harold Bloom offered a provocative comment saying, "Close thy Auden, open thy Stevens, comparing him with Wallace Stevens, and that line too has been tested in exam. The first full-length study of Auden appeared in 1951, written by Richard Hoggart, titled Auden, an Introductory Essay. This foundational study helped position Auden as one of the greatest English poets of the 20th century, a title he continues to hold today. Auden's dramatic career began early. In 1928, he wrote his first play titled Paid on Both Sides, subtitled A Charade, and this title has been asked in exam. It was a daring blend of poetic dialogue and stage action, symbolizing the tension between private emotion and public duty, a theme that would echo throughout his later works. His next major publication was The Orators, an English Study, which first appeared in 1932 and was revised in later editions of 1934 and 1966. This text, too, has been asked in exam. It combines poetry and prose in an experimental structure that examines language, psychology, and national identity. Auden wrote the verse drama The Dance of Death, a satirical allegory about the decay of European civilization. Then came The Dog Beneath the Skin in 1935, a play written with his close friend Christopher Isherwood, and this one has been mentioned in exam. The play explores heroism, morality, and disillusionment through vivid poetic dialogue. Auden and Isherwood continued their collaboration with The Ascent of F6, published in 1937, another play that has been asked in exam. What makes this play even more memorable is that it included the first version of Auden's famous poem, Funeral Blues, often remembered by its opening line, "Stop all the clocks." That poem's appearance in this play has also been noted in exam, so keep it in mind. During the same period, Auden released a collection of poems titled On This Island in 1936, which was originally published under the name Look Stranger. In 1937, Auden collaborated with Louis MacNice on Letters from Iceland, a travel book blending prose, verse, and satire. It's a witty and insightful reflection on European politics and culture. A few years later, in 1939, Auden and Isherwood co-wrote another travel narrative called Journey to a War, mixing prose and verse to record their experiences in China just before the outbreak of the Second World War. Then came one of his most celebrated poetry collections, Another Time, published in 1940. This book included several of Auden's best-known poems such as Dover, As He Is, and Musée des Beaux-Arts. The latter poem, by the way, has been asked in exam, so make sure you remember it. Another Time also contains classics like In Memory of W, B, Yeats, The Unknown Citizen, Law Like Love, and September 1, 1939, a poem whose title date itself has been asked in exam. The collection also features In Memory of Sigmund Freud, which has likewise appeared in exam. These poems together capture Auden's transition from English to American sensibility, from public commentary to private reflection. In 1940, he wrote New Year Letter, a long philosophical poem about art, morality, and the challenges of modern life. It was followed by The Double Man in 1941, which includes sections titled Canzone and Kairos and Logos. Auden's For the Time Being appeared in 1944, and this work has been asked in exam. It's actually composed of two major parts. For the Time Being, a Christmas oratorio and the Sea, and The Mirror, a commentary on Shakespeare's The Tempest, the latter title also being a common exam question. Both texts reveal Auden's growing engagement with Christianity and his attempt to reconcile faith with modern doubt. Then in 1947, Auden published The Age of Anxiety, a Baroque eclogue, which has also been tested in exam. This complex and introspective poem, exploring human isolation in the modern world, later won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. In 1950, he delivered a series of lectures later published as The Enchafed Flood, the Romantic Iconography of the Sea, a title that has been asked in exam. Here, Auden examines how the image of the sea became a symbol of longing and danger in Romantic literature. Between 1949 and 1954, he composed a sequence of 7 poems for Good Friday called Horae Canonici, another title that has appeared in exam. The sequence reflects his deep spiritual meditation on time, ritual, and redemption. Auden's The Shield of Achilles, published in 1955, is another essential text often asked in exam. It juxtaposes the ancient world of Homer with the moral emptiness of modern times, showing Auden's gift for blending myth with modernity. His later collections include Homage to Clio from 1960, exploring history and memory, and The Dyer's Hand, a 1962 prose book that gathers his most influential essays on poetry, art, and criticism. Then came About the House, published in 1965, which includes poems like Thanksgiving for a Habitat. These later works reveal a more domestic and reflective Auden, using forms that even imitate the modernist style of William Carlos Williams. Now let's explore one of W.H. Auden's most beloved and haunting poems, Funeral Blues. The poem first appeared in The Ascent of F6, a verse drama written by Auden and Christopher Isherwood in 1936, and that publication date has been asked in exam. The play itself became one of their most successful collaborations and was a major contribution to English poetic drama of the 1930s, a fact also noted in exam. Originally, Funeral Blues was not a standalone elegy. It was part of that play, written as a mock funeral song, something light, almost satirical. But later, Auden rewrote it as a cabaret song, transforming it into one of the most deeply emotional and widely loved elegies in modern English poetry. Both the play and the poem were set to music by Benjamin Britten, and that collaboration has been mentioned in exam. The version we know today was published in 1940 in Auden's collection Another Time under the title Funeral Blues. The poem begins with commanding simplicity. Stop all the clocks. Cut off the telephone. Immediately we are drawn into a world where grief demands the silencing of everything time, sound, and motion. The speaker's pain is so immense that even ordinary life feels unbearable. Here's something interesting. Critic Seamus Perry has compared the tone of Funeral Blues to the clever, polished songs of Cole Porter, calling Auden's work ingenious and witty. This comment by Perry has been cited in exam. But as Perry also observes, the poem is not as light as its cabaret origins suggest. Beneath the elegance of rhyme and rhythm lies a sense of devastating loss. A key emotional moment arrives with the line, "I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong." This single confession captures the true immensity of love learned through absence, a theme that has been asked in exam. The shift from the ordinary to the cosmic, from clocks and telephones to stars and suns, marks the emotional architecture of the poem. The final stanza ends in pure desolation. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood, for nothing now can ever come to any good. That last line, too, has been tested in exam, so remember it closely. The command to pour away the ocean creates a symbolic erasure of nature itself. Love is gone. So the world must be dismantled. Now, you might notice a small technical curiosity. The near rhyme between woods and wood at the end. That lack of perfect rhyme is deliberate. It echoes the speaker's inner dissonance, a world slightly out of tune, fractured by grief. Critic John G. Blair highlighted how the poem's imperative mood, full of commands like stop, cut off, and put out, forces readers to share in the speaker's tension. Meanwhile, Heidi Hartwig observed that the meaning of the poem shifts depending on how it's performed, whether sung, spoken, or staged, suggesting that presentation shapes interpretation. Joseph Warren Beach adds another layer, explaining that the first stanzas deal with mundane details of morning telephones, clocks, and traffic policemen, while the later stanzas lift the poem into cosmic imagery, evoking stars, moons, and oceans. When the two halves are pieced together, Beach says the poem becomes lively, not in tone but in structural energy, balancing the human and the universal. Altogether, Funeral Blues combines everyday realism with cosmic disillusionment, mirroring the emotional crisis of the interwar period, a generation caught between loss, uncertainty, and the need to keep feeling. The poem's ability to hold both the private and the global, the intimate and the immense, is what makes it timeless. So even though Funeral Blues began as a simple cabaret song, it has grown into one of the most enduring elegies of modern English poetry. Its quiet intensity reminds us that grief, though deeply personal, connects all of humanity, and that love, even when lost, leaves behind the most unforgettable silence. Now let's talk about one of W.H. Auden's most powerful and debated poems, September 1, 1939. It was published in 1940, and that publication year has been asked in exam. The poem reflects Auden's emotional response to the outbreak of World War II. The title itself marks a turning point in world history, Germany's invasion of Poland, which triggered the war. This factual connection between the poem's title and the invasion has been asked in exam as well. Imagine the atmosphere, the fear, the uncertainty, and the deep disillusionment of a civilization collapsing into chaos. September 1, 1939 quickly became one of Auden's best-known works. Yet, interestingly, Auden himself grew uncomfortable with its tone. He later called it an incurable dishonesty and revised it several times. By 1945, he had even removed the final stanza, eventually leaving the poem out of his collected shorter poems in 1966. The poem's structure is modeled on the stanza form of Yeats' Easter, 1916, a connection that has been asked in exam. You can feel that influence in the balanced rhythm and the tone of public reflection. Auden's poem looks back on the historical failures that led to the war, tracing Germany's intellectual and moral decline, as he writes of the habit-forming pain, mismanagement and grief. He even references the nation's history from Luther until now, and that specific phrase has also been asked in exam. At a deeper level, Auden explores the idea that external wars are extensions of our inner conflicts. His psychological insight came partly from his reading of Carl Jung's Psychology and Religion, published in 1938. The most quoted line from this poem declares, "We must love one another or die." This haunting moral appeal has been asked in exam multiple times. Later, Auden revised it to "We must love one another and die," but the original version remained iconic. In its closing stanzas, the poem turns toward hope, invoking the just, those rare individuals who, through simple acts of decency, sustain human faith. It ends with a quiet yet luminous image, "Show an affirming flame." This final phrase beautifully captures the poet's wish for courage and compassion amid global despair. So, even though Auden himself distanced from the poem later, the 1st of September 1939 remains a defining moment of poetic conscience, balancing intellect, emotion, and moral urgency during one of history's darkest hours. Now let's turn to another of Auden's masterpieces, Musée des Beaux-Arts, written around the same time and published in Another Time in 1940. That publication fact has been asked in exam. The poem begins with a calm, almost conversational tone. About suffering they were never wrong, the old masters. These opening words immediately set the theme, the quiet acceptance of human pain. Auden's central idea here is the indifference of ordinary people to the suffering of others, a topic that's still powerfully relevant today. The tone throughout is critical irony, as if the poet is quietly observing how tragedy often goes unnoticed while life continues as usual. In the first stanza, Auden describes how anguish is treated as commonplace, not as a dramatic tragedy. Even dreadful martyrdom must run its course, he says, and that line has been asked in exam. The poet's point is simple yet chilling. While one person suffers, another might just be eating lunch or opening a window. He notes how the torturer's horse scratches its rump, oblivious to the pain surrounding it, a striking image that turns cruelty into casual routine. The second stanza brings us to the poem's central image, a Renaissance painting of the Fall of Icarus. This painting was long attributed to Peter Bruegel the Elder, though modern scholarship suggests it's an early copy by another artist. The poem's title, Musée des Beaux-Arts, refers to the Museum of Fine Arts in Brussels, where Auden saw the painting. Here, Auden describes how Icarus plunges into the sea after flying too close to the sun, yet no one seems to care. The farmer continues ploughing, the ship sails calmly on, and the dogs go about their doggy life. Life remains ordinary while tragedy unfolds unnoticed. The poet uses the technique of ekphrasis, writing poetry that vividly describes a work of visual art. Through this, he contrasts mythical disaster with everyday indifference. The poem's long, irregular lines echo natural speech, creating a conversational rhythm that mirrors its philosophical tone. Notice how the details, someone eating or opening a window, make suffering feel both distant and eerily familiar. Auden's references to multiple Bruegel paintings enrich the imagery. Landscapes, peasants, animals, and tiny glimpses of catastrophe all merge into one vivid human scene. There is no grand martyrdom here, only the steady continuity of life amid unseen loss. Our first stop is Auden's The Age of Anxiety, written in 1947, and this publication year has been asked in exam. Critics describe this poem as a baroque eclogue, a term that has also been noted in exam. It's an unusual and complex poem, often called Auden's last long poem, and it even won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 1948, a fact that has been tested in exam. The poem explores the deep sense of human isolation and spiritual emptiness that pervaded the modern world after the Second World War. Now, picture this. The setting is a nighttime bar in New York City. 4 strangers meet by chance, 3 men and 1 woman. Over drinks and conversations, they reveal their private fears and longings. As the night deepens, the group moves to the woman's apartment, where 2 of the men eventually leave, and the 3rd passes out drunk. By dawn, the illusion of companionship fades, and each returns to the loneliness of the city's cold streets. The poem is less about events and more about the psychological journey of modern individuals searching for meaning in a world stripped of faith, tradition, and certainty. Through these characters, Auden mirrors an entire generation's anxiety, the ache of people who live among crowds yet feel utterly alone. Next comes The Shield of Achilles, one of Auden's most famous and disturbing poems. It was first published in 1952 and later included in his 1955 collection, and yes, that publication information has been asked in exam. This poem reimagines the myth of Achilles' shield from Homer's Iliad, making it a modern-day ekphrasis or poetic description of visual art. Critics often note that the shorter lines in the poem describe the god Hephaestus at work on the shield, and this very detail has been mentioned in exam. Now, Thetis, the mother of Achilles, watches her divine husband forging the shield. She expects to see images of beauty, harmony, and peace, as in Homer's epic scenes of weddings, harvests, and joyful cities. But instead, she is horrified. What Hephaestus creates is not the world of Homeric glory, but a reflection of the modern, barren, and impersonal world. The first scene shows an anonymous army standing in formation, listening without emotion. This exact detail has been asked in exam. The second scene shows a crowd passively watching 3 executions, and that too has been tested in exam. The third scene depicts a ragged urchin throwing a stone at a bird, another line that has appeared in exam questions. Auden's blunt line, "Girls are raped, 2 boys knife a third," captures the brutality of a world without compassion. And yes, that shocking line has been quoted in exam. The poem ends with Thetis weeping, realizing that her son will enter a world where promises are broken and innocence is destroyed. The final words remind us he would not live long. Through this poem, Auden contrasts Homer's lyrical vision of a balanced, heroic world with the modern age of moral collapse and despair. The shield, once a symbol of protection, now reflects the violence, emptiness, and hopelessness of post-war humanity. Now, let's look at a fascinating part of Auden's literary circle, the Auden Group, sometimes called the Auden generation. This was a vibrant gathering of British and Irish writers active during the 1930s, and this collective name has been asked in exam. The group included W.H. Auden, Louis MacNeice, Cecil Day Lewis, Stephen Spender, and Christopher Isherwood, all of whom have been tested in exam. Some lists even add Edward, Upward, and Rex Warner, names that have also come up in exam questions. Together, these poets were sometimes called the 30s poets, a label that reflected both their shared generation and their social commitment. They wrote about the turbulence of their times, war, industrial decay, and the search for moral stability. Now here's something interesting, the name MacSpaunday. It sounds strange, doesn't it? This nickname was actually invented by the poet Roy Campbell in his 1946 work, Talking Bronco. The name stood for a single imagined poet made up of 4 initials. Mac for Louis MacNeice, SP for Stephen Spender, ON for Auden, and Day for Cecil Day Lewis. This witty fusion has also been specifically asked in exam. Although playful, the label MacSpaunday symbolized something serious. The shared intellectual energy of a generation that wanted poetry to engage with politics, psychology, and society, rather than retreat into personal emotion.